Okay, thank you very much. I'm here representing, why does this look different than I'm used to? Oh, it looks fine there, okay. I'm here representing COPE today, and I wonder how many of you know COPE? A lot of you know COPE. Okay, so I'm not going to talk a great deal about COPE, but I am here as a COPE volunteer. I've been on COPE Council for 3 years. We restructured last year, and I became a trustee, and for 2 years, I've been the chair of the Complaints Committee for COPE, which is a really fascinating volunteer activity. And although, as you heard in the introduction, most of my career I've been an academic administrator. So I thought I'd seen all the wacky kind of behavior you get out of faculty members throughout my career. No, I was amazed at some of the things that I discovered once I became the chair of the Complaint Committee. If you know COPE, I'm just going to give you a couple of, the way I've organized my presentation is I left the stuff about COPE mostly at the end, so if I ran out of time, most of the stuff is on the website of COPE. So as you know, COPE is the Committee on Publication Ethics. It was founded in 1997. A small group of mostly or entirely medical journal editors met informally in Vancouver, actually. And they met as a kind of self-help group and talked about the challenges they were dealing with. And the purpose of COPE is, so now it's been around since 1997, and the membership, the last I looked, which was about a month ago, was there were 10,123 members, most of them are editors and publishers, with membership from 103 countries. The principal objective of COPE is to educate and advance knowledge in methods of safeguarding the integrity of the scholarly record for the benefit of the public. We basically represent our members as a volunteer member organization. We try to educate and advocate for our members. But we do get a lot of complaints from people who aren't our members. And they primarily are from authors who feel they've been hard done by and treated unfairly, either by the editor of a journal and or the publisher. Sometimes they complain at different levels because sometimes they've complained about to the editor sufficiently that now they're appealing to the publisher and they believe that both have let them down. And we get more and more, we get third-party complaints. And we also get editors and publishers more frequently not filing complaints but asking for advice about complaints. Some of the stuff that Jason was talking about in terms of the publisher-editor issue is more and more editors and publishers having to deal with the fact that they find out that there's an allegation of wrongdoing through a third-party blog. So no one actually directly comes to them and says, this is a bad thing. They are told, somebody gets in touch with them and says, read what it says on PubPeer, because you guys are getting dumped on big time. So that's an interesting, so they often come to us and say, how do we manage this? How do we manage that we're trying to do an investigation and other things being equal, we should be doing this in a confidential manner when it's all out there. It's not confidential anymore. Everybody knows what's going on. So COPE's mission is generally to provide leadership and thinking about publication ethics. We don't have any legislative authority to make anybody do anything. And that's one of the ways in which we actually disappoint people who complain to us, because they feel aggrieved. And often they've been through, they think they're kind of last resort. An editor did something bad to them and said that this was self-plagiarism, redundant publication, or salami slicing. And the editor thinks it's sufficient, when they investigate, think it's sufficiently serious, that they then contact the university that the person works at. So there's been an investigation and disciplinary action at the university that they think was bad for them and harsh and not fair. They are mad at the journal because the journal was the one that ratted them out at the university. And they come to COPE thinking, you can punish your members. You can somehow make them do something. First of all, most of the time, we find that editors and publishers take their role very seriously, and overwhelmingly, they proceed in a fair and appropriate manner. But even if we have some belief that something wasn't quite right in the process, The only thing we can do is mediate a dialogue. We don't have the authority to come down on our members. We are discussing right now, what if our members don't follow our code of conduct? We have a lot of policy statements about what editors should do and what reviewers should do and how people should follow investigations when things go wrong. If they ignore that, if they totally ignore that, do we withdraw their membership? And part of the issue is that most of the major publishers the major international publishers join COPE on behalf of all their journals. But as Jason noted, it doesn't mean that the editors of those journals are well informed about academic or publication ethics. So as I noted, basically we're an educative and advisory kind of organization, and we support our members to the best of our ability. And as I noted, the organization met first informally in 1997. In the first annual report in 1998, Richard Smith, who was one of the founding editors, stated that the COPE may not prove useful in the long term because the international profession produces an adequate response to research misconduct. Well, I'm not going to suggest that the response has been generally inadequate, but it sure has been complex. And so we end up not with a organization that thought by 1998 they would solve all the problems and then eliminate the organization, but we ended up this many years later with over 10,000 members in over 103 countries. So complexity in the digital age. What is an adequate response to research misconduct, at least as it exists in the published world? And in this past April, a month ago, McNutt provided a brief summary of due process in the Twitter age, a journal summit convened by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. And the topics discussed included the statutes of limitations on demands for investigation and retractions. And what I'm suggesting, I have a slightly different flavor to my comments on Jason's. I think that the pressure on editors and the demands for editors, on demands for editors' times, and editors can be tiny little societies with no publisher, they self-publish, or they can be huge international journals, and the requirements are pretty much the same. And the demands are becoming so profound and complex that I think for most of us, we find it, I started out many years ago loving the editorial process, and every time I get some allegation of misconduct, it takes me off my agenda completely, and I get into a protracted investigation of people who generally never apologize but threaten to sue you, among other things. So this statutes of limitations on demands for investigation and retraction, two of the representatives at that workshop or at that summit talked about being asked to retract 50-year-old articles where the authors are deceased. I don't know about your experience, but my experience is if I had to go back 30 years ago when I founded the Journal of Business Ethics and try to find out who was on the editorial board, where are the papers that reviewed the papers? Where are those peer-reviewed papers? I might in a crawl space in my basement be able to find some of it, but I generally don't think, because that's where we were at paper in those days. I used to send a letter out to acknowledge receipt of a manuscript. I used to send out a number of letters to potential reviewers asking if they'd review. We'd then photocopy the pieces of paper, the manuscripts, and send them out. We'd then get the paper trail back. It took months and months and months, but people didn't think that was unacceptable. They find that really unacceptable, that kind of timeline. So what are you going to do? What's a normal and reasonable expectation? We all care about keeping the scholarly record accurate and truthful, but does it really make sense that someone wants to try to retract articles when all of the authors may be deceased? So what's the new time demands for keeping track of all your reviews and all of the information with respect to an article that was published that is then alleged down the road to have been problematic? Curnow is also a member of Council, the Council on Publication Ethics, recently wrote an article where she talked about three issues. The role of the internet in facilitating misconduct, and we all know that that's it makes misconduct much easier. We also know it makes finding out about misconduct much easier. I remember the first time a dean of grad studies came into my office and said, "This master's thesis that I just read I think is really too good." This was the 1990s. It just doesn't read like a master's thesis. It's too good. So I put the title of a master's thesis into a search engine and came up with a PhD thesis. The guy was so lazy he hadn't even changed the title, but the entire PhD thesis from somebody from the University of Texas. So yes, we not only facilitates misconduct, but it certainly facilitates catching people. The issue of confidentiality, and I've already alluded to some of the problems of confidentiality. There's post-publication peer review, there's anonymous post-publication peer review. Anyone can start a blog, anyone can talk about anybody. I've had some blowback at being the chair of the complaints committee because there's somebody who's been making allegations of various members of COPE on various blogs because he doesn't like what we're doing with a particular complaint. And how incentives and research assessment drive author behavior. We know the culture of publisher perish. We know people seem, I mean, one of the things that I'm getting pretty long in the tooth, not quite as old as our keynote speaker this morning, but getting there. And so I get a lot of people, and since I've edited 4 journals, 3 of them were Springer journals. One was a Canadian bilingual women's studies journal that was really tiny, and me and my friends would apply for a small grant from the federal government to offset the costs, and we would drive the layout to the printer, and then we'd have a night where we drank a lot of wine and stuffed them in the envelopes and mailed them out. So I have a reputation for somebody who knows how to deal with this stuff. And I have a lot of young scholars writing to me and asking me about the publish and perish issue. They're very confused with all of this stuff. They're confused with the world that's changed in publication. They're worried about what journals they should choose to try to publish in. They're worried about impact factors. When I first started my academic career, I wanted peer-reviewed articles to be published where I created the knowledge. But I wasn't obsessed about the impact factors, about citation manipulation, about all of the crazy things that's now pressuring young scholars even more than it was when I was a young academic. Yes, 4 minutes. Okay, all right. Emerging issue, who owns peer review? So I'm just going to go through a few of I won't talk about predatory journals because we've talked about that. Recently emerging issues, who owns peer review? There are a number of people now who want to take the peer review they receive and they want to publish it and critique it. They want to put it on their web. What's the impact this is going to have? And we are getting peer reviews now appearing on blogs. Is this going to, I find that it's been harder and harder and harder to get people to review manuscripts over the time I've been editing. They now seem to not have the expectation that it's part of normal service of an academic, and they turn you down a lot of times, and they turn you down saying they're too busy with their own research. Is this publication of who owns peer review, are the peer review publications going to discourage individuals from participating in peer review? And we need them. Challenges to the role of editor. I've talked about this briefly. It doesn't matter whether you got a little editorial journal that you have no resources or you're a part of a big machine. When an allegation arises, you have to conduct the same type of rigorous investigation, whether they have support or not. Increasing allegations are from third party and they're very public. How do you protect the confidentiality of someone when you're investigating? This is their career. And sometimes they actually only made an innocent mistake. They didn't do anything horrendous that they planned to do. But it's all out there. And what's your responsibility in protecting their confidentiality while you conduct an investigation? New meanings of timeliness and lack of confidentiality. Basically, this stuff will be available, I believe, for everyone to look at. So I've essentially spoken to each of these. This is something that I think you'll find interesting to look at if you want to look at it later on the web. And it's just, I got this from a journal that was published in 2010. And what I like about it is it shows a spectrum from just making a wrong observation, non-intentionally making errors, people make mistakes, to misconduct to ultimate fraud, and the spectrum and how you should understand the spectrum, because not everyone is evil. I still experience the academy as filled with people of integrity who want to create rigorous knowledge with and have the expectations they should do so ethically. Okay, citation manipulation. There are, again, these young scholars that I find are worried that editors are manipulative, power-based people who want to screw around with their citations and force you to cite their journals just to make their impact factors go up. Again, there may be some players like that. I don't think everyone is like that. Citation amnesia is another issue that's been coming forth in the last couple of years. People who decide that the knowledge has been around long enough that they don't have to cite people anymore. And so what's your responsibility as an editor about that, or as a publisher? Is the sky falling? I don't think it's falling as quickly as most people think. If you look at what happened, this is just some data from PubMed from 1990 to 2004, and actually from 2002 to 2014, and 1990 to 2002. And essentially it shows that there was a big jump. When we first were able to track retractions, it looked like there was an enormous crisis. But now that we're much more familiar with what we're doing with respect to retractions and keeping track of them, they've significantly leveled off. And I think it was that there was a huge jump when the technology allowed us to track retractions. And I think I'm just gonna, that's what I put at the end, which you can get on the website of COPE. So I'll end there so that we can have some questions.